You're driving home. Maybe you just left work. Maybe you grabbed some groceries. Maybe you're just tired and ready to get through the front door. And then you see them, the lights, blue and red, flashing in your rearview mirror. Your heart does that thing it always does, even when you haven't done anything wrong. You pull over, the officer walks up slowly, taps the window, you roll it down, and then he looks at you and says 4 words. Show me your ID. And without even thinking, you reach into your wallet, pull it out, and hand it over. Because that's just what you do, right? Here's the thing though. That moment, that exact split second where you reach for your wallet without asking a single question, could be the moment that changes everything about how that stop ends. Not because showing ID is always wrong, but because most drivers have absolutely no idea what they are and are not required to do at that moment. And that knowledge gap, that is the hidden trap. And today, we are going to close it. I want to be upfront with you from the very beginning. This channel exists for one reason only, to make sure that you as a driver know your rights. Not in a way that makes you confrontational or difficult, not in a way that turns every traffic stop into a battle, but in a way that means you are never ever caught off guard. Because there is a huge difference between choosing to cooperate and not knowing you had a choice. Today we are talking about one of the most common moments on the road, an officer asking for your ID. And we are going to unpack exactly what the law says, where most people go wrong, and what you should actually do when it happens to you. Let's get into it. The law behind ID requests what nobody tells you. Okay, so let's start at the foundation, because this is where almost everything goes wrong for most people. Most people assume there is one straightforward law that says you must show ID to a police officer whenever they ask. Simple, clean, universal. But that assumption is completely incorrect, and one of the most expensive mistakes a driver can make. Here is what is actually true. In the United States, there is no single federal law that requires every person in every situation to show identification to a police officer. None. What exists instead is a patchwork of state-level laws, and those laws vary quite significantly depending on exactly where you are standing or sitting when that question is asked. Now, when it comes to driving, most states are pretty consistent. If you are the driver of a vehicle that has been lawfully stopped, yes, you are generally required to hand over your driver's license, your vehicle registration, and proof of insurance. That is tied to your privilege of operating a vehicle on public roads, and that part is fairly standard across the country. But here is where it gets genuinely interesting, and where the hidden trap starts to reveal itself. There are 2 completely different scenarios that drivers constantly confuse with one another. The first scenario is that you are the driver. Your obligation is clearer. License, registration, and insurance provided the stop was lawful. The second scenario is that you are a passenger, and this is where the entire conversation changes. In most states, a passenger in a vehicle is not automatically required to show identification just because the car was pulled over, unless the officer has independent, reasonable suspicion that the passenger personally has been involved in criminal activity. That passenger may have the legal right to decline. Same car, same traffic stop. 2 completely different sets of rights depending on where you're sitting. That right there is the first layer of the trap. Stop and identify laws. The layer most drivers never even knew existed. Now let's go one level deeper, because once you understand this next part, so much of what happens during traffic stops will start to make a lot more sense. Across the United States, there are laws known as stop and identify statutes. Roughly 24 states have some version of these laws on the books. And what they say in plain terms is this: if a police officer has what is called reasonable articulable suspicion, meaning a specific, explainable reason to believe you have been involved in criminal activity, then that officer may legally require you to identify yourself. Now sit with that phrase for a second. Reasonable articulable suspicion, not a gut feeling, not because you looked nervous, a real, specific, explainable reason. States like Texas, Nevada, Colorado, and Illinois are among those that have this law. And if you are in one of those states and an officer has that legal basis, refusing to identify yourself could actually lead to an arrest, not just a ticket. But here's what most people completely miss. Even in stop and identify states, the officer must first have that legal foundation to stand on. They cannot simply walk up to any person and demand ID with zero justification. The law simply does not work that way. The trap is not that people know this and ignore it. The trap is that they never knew it at all. And that gap right there is what puts drivers in situations they never needed to be in. The real moment, what you should actually do. All right, the lights are behind you. The officer is at your window. The question has been asked. What do you actually do? First, stay calm. Your nervous system is going to want to rush and over-explain. Resist that. A calm driver is a driver who is in control of the moment. Second, identify your role immediately. Are you the driver or a passenger? That single fact determines your baseline legal obligation right then and there. Third, you can calmly and respectfully ask the officer one simple question. Am I being detained or am I free to go? That is not confrontational. It is a completely legitimate legal question, and the answer will tell you a great deal about where you stand. Fourth, if you are legally required to provide your ID, do it clearly and calmly. You are not required to explain where you have been or where you were going. Hand over what is legally required and nothing more. And fifth, regardless of how confident you feel about your rights at that moment, do not physically resist, do not argue aggressively, and do not make sudden movements. Even if your rights are being violated, and sometimes they genuinely are, the side of the road is not where you win that argument. Stay safe. Document everything afterward, and pursue any legal remedy through the proper channels. Those 5 things done calmly and consistently can genuinely change how a traffic stop ends for you. The mistakes that cost drivers the most. Now, I want to walk you through the mistakes I see come up over and over again in these situations, because sometimes understanding what not to do is just as powerful as knowing what to do. The first mistake is over-volunteering information. The officer asks for your ID, you hand it over, and then, out of nervousness or just out of habit, you immediately say something like, "I know I was going a little fast back there," or "I think I may have rolled through that stop." That voluntary admission, the one nobody asked you for, is admissible, and it will very often be used against you. Hand over what is required. Let the officer speak first, then respond to what is actually asked. The second mistake is turning the traffic stop into a roadside debate about your rights. Here's the reality. Knowing your rights is powerful and important. That is exactly why we make these videos. But asserting those rights in an aggressive or confrontational way during a live traffic stop very rarely ends well for the driver. There is a time and a place to push back legally. That time is not at the side of a highway at 11 o'clock at night. Stay composed. Let the stop end safely. Then explore every legal option available to you. The third mistake is assuming that the rules are the same everywhere you drive. Whether you are a local driver or just passing through another state on a road trip, the legal landscape can shift significantly from one state line to the next. Driving into a stop and yield state without knowing its laws puts you at an immediate and completely unnecessary disadvantage. The fourth mistake is that passengers automatically show ID without any legal obligation to do so. If you are sitting in the passenger seat and you hand over your ID out of pure habit or social pressure, you have now voluntarily introduced information about yourself, including any outstanding warrants or prior record, into a situation where you had no legal requirement to do so. Passengers have rights too. Know them. And the fifth mistake is not documenting the stop afterward. If anything about that interaction felt wrong, unclear, or felt like your rights may not have been fully respected, write everything down the moment you were safely away. The time, the location, the officer's badge number, exactly what was said, and in what order. That documentation could become critically important if you ever need to pursue a legal remedy. How to actually find out what your state's laws say. So let's talk about how you actually get this information for your specific state, because knowing the general principle is great, but knowing your exact local law is what actually protects you. There are 3 reliable ways to do this, and all of them are free. The first is to visit your state's official Department of Motor Vehicles or Department of Transportation website. Most states publish clear, accessible summaries of what drivers and passengers are legally required to do during a traffic stop. Start there. The second is to do a targeted search using your state name, followed by the phrase "stop and identify statute" or "driver license requirement during traffic stop." Legal databases like Justia and FindLaw break down state statutes in plain, readable language without requiring a law degree to understand. The third option, and I genuinely hope you take advantage of this one, is to stay right here on this channel, because coming up very soon we are going to start doing state-by-state breakdowns covering exactly what drivers and passengers in each state are legally required to do, what they are not required to do, and what their specific rights look like during a traffic stop. So if that is valuable to you, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss those. The bottom line is this: you do not want to be Googling your state's stop and identify laws from the side of the road while an officer is walking toward your car. Know it now. Be ready then. That is the whole point. Before we wrap up, let's lock in the most important things from today. As a driver, you are generally required to provide your license, registration, and insurance during a lawful traffic stop in virtually every state. That obligation is tied to your driving privilege, and it is well established. As a passenger, your obligation to show ID is far less automatic and varies significantly depending on your state. Do not assume you are required to simply because the car was pulled over. Roughly 24 states have stop and identify laws, meaning that officers with reasonable suspicion can require you to identify yourself even outside of a vehicle context. Know whether your state is one of them before you need to know it. How you handle the moment matters just as much as what you know legally. Stay calm. Be respectful. Know your role. Ask the right question. Comply with what is legally required. And document everything afterward if anything felt off. And finally, never over-volunteer. Never argue aggressively at the roadside. And never assume the laws are identical in every state you pass through. That is your legal foundation. Carry it with you every time you get behind the wheel. And that is the hidden trap, the one most drivers walk straight into without ever realizing it was there. And look, I want to be really clear about something before you go. Understanding your rights is not about being difficult. It is not about making every traffic stop into a confrontation. It is simply about being informed, about knowing what you are required to do and what you are not, about walking into any situation with enough knowledge to handle it correctly, legally, and safely. Because there is a real difference between compliance that comes from understanding and compliance that comes from not knowing you had any other option. That is what this is all about. If this video gave you something real today, something you are going to actually carry with you the next time you get behind the wheel, then I have one simple question. Hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing. And it means you will be here for every video we put out going forward, including those state-by-state breakdowns that are coming very soon. Thank you genuinely for spending your time here today. Drive safely, know your rights, and we will see you in the next one.